Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps, where negativity never sounded so good. Now here's your host, Thomas Purcell.
So please don't tell me that this time will be different. I read an article that said median CEO pay crosses 10 million average in 2013. There's a reason for this. The headline is a misnomer. You have to go into the article. It says in the headline, median CEO pay crosses 10 million. That's not true. No CEO is paid more than $450,000 by law in this market. Bill Clinton, I believe it was back in 1993, passed a law putting a cap on CEO pay. $450,000. That's it. What he did, however, was say CEOs could receive more in compensation if that compensation package is tied to a company's performance. You have to understand what happened in the market in 94 and 93. People were complaining that CEOs were getting rich, bankrupting their own company. They were getting huge CEO paychecks, and the companies were not performing and people were being laid off. So his rule and his solution, which was simplistic at best, was we'll put a cap on CEO pay, but tie their compensation to the performance of the company. So CEOs could receive large amounts of pay and benefits, but only if, stock prices increase. And then he set into motion a number of tax breaks and loopholes that would encourage companies to pay CEOs based on performance pay. Well, what happened? What happened was they started structuring called 162 plans. Section 162 of the IRS code provides a benefit to corporations who tie compensation packages to stock. I used to design them for companies. It's how I made my money. What a company does is say, here's your $450,000 in pay, but we're going to put $40 or $50 or $60,000 away for you in a deferred account. And then when you retire, you can receive this money provided you meet certain qualifications. The stock price is at a certain level. The company has to have so many employees. Whatever you want to design into this golden handcuff package. That's why all these CEOs, when they retire, get tens of millions of dollars, because there's a huge incentive for them to do it. The money put into deferred compensation plans, to put it in a simplified manner, is not taxable. Not in the ordinary way. It's tax deferred. So a company, if it makes a lot of money, can pour huge amounts of money into these Section 162 package to avoid taxation. And then when the CEO quits or resigns or is forced out, they walk away with tens of millions of dollars in benefits. They can also receive these benefits in a small percentage early in the form of loans. They borrow against their deferred compensation, and then when they walk away from the company, the money that they took out in deferred compensation early is repaid back to the deferred compensation fund. What happens is the American taxpayer is getting swindled, and CEO compensation packages went through the roof. They get stock options, and they get deferred compensation packages that are enormous because the taxation to the company is so freaking high that the company would be a fool not to do these packages. It means avoiding tens of millions of dollars in taxes that they would ordinarily have to pay. As a result, too, because deferred compensation packages, which they provide not just to the CEO, but every executive officer that works for the company, are factored into the stock price because it's cash on hand. The PE ratios go through the roof, and so does the stock price. which leads us to our second story. Goldman Sachs says the trading market, the S&P 500, the stock market, is artificially high, and it's an unusual situation. It's another balloon forming, folks. Because companies now can borrow money on the cheap from the government at almost no interest. They can pour this enormous amount of money into their coffers, artificially bump the stock price, pay the CEO huge amounts of money, and defraud the American people in the process. This is a major factor in the separation of wealth in the country. You have executive officers and stockholders, large capital holders of these large corporations that are plundering the U.S. economy. Why hire anyone? They're just going to raise the minimum wage. They're just going to change the rules of the game in taxation. They're going to sock. Why hire anybody? Why not just pay the CEO and the executive officers huge amounts of money and force more work out of the workers? This is what happens when government gets involved in free markets. This is the net result. And it's why I'm so angry. It's why the middle class can't catch a fair break. Middle management is almost non-existent anymore. The average worker making $100,000 a year for a middle management job is dying. And it's also why these companies insist on bringing in foreign workers to do the work that American workers used to do. Because the foreign worker will work hours and under conditions and for pay that the American worker won't work for. The American worker graduates from school, has some skills, and has a certain requirement for a certain amount of pay in order to pay back the loans and also what a standard would be for a job. The foreign worker doesn't have that. He'll do it for half that price. And he'll do just as good a job. He'll put in the extra hours and won't say anything. Because to him or her, this is a boon. Back in their home country, they're getting paid 10 cents an hour. You don't think that they would jump for a middle management job at $50,000 a year when an American worker wouldn't do it for less than $100? Of course they would. They'll sit at their desk late into the night and not complain and do it for without overtime, won't say anything. Not so with the American worker. Their standards are higher. Their requests for benefits are higher. Their requests for time off are higher. A starving man will always be willing to work for a price that's lower than someone who is not. That's just the plain fact of it, and they know it. And then they created tax loopholes and tax breaks for a political agenda to hire these foreign workers. It's no wonder that 40% of the labor pool ain't working. Why should they? Pay scales and benefits packages are not up to standard because of all the foreign workers coming in. This isn't even talking about illegal immigrants. This isn't even, I'm talking about the middle class of the United States. They're just not working. And there's no incentive for them to work. The American worker has been living off the fat of the land for the last 5 years, and it's been subsidized by this government. This is why there's a disparity in wealth in this nation. It's because government has gotten so involved in the way companies and compensation pay packages are designed. It's not just the minimum wage worker. It's not just the unions. It's a fundamental change in the way large corporations hire and compensate the individuals that do work for them. This is something that the American people need to be made aware of. Companies don't hire people and just give them a paycheck. When you get into management, which is where the bulk of the middle class comes from, small business owners and middle management jobs, compensation packages have to be very carefully designed to avoid government interference. They have to be designed for the benefit of the employer because there are enormous tax implications. Without those implications, without those rules, without those guidelines, without the cheap money flooding into the market in the form of the government printing it and loaning out to big corporations, it would be a much more competitive market, and I dare say there would be plenty of jobs available. The work is getting done. It's just not getting done by the middle class. This is why the stock market looks the way it does. It's an artificial market, folks. And if you buy into it, you might make some money if you get out in the right time. But man, there is a bubble coming that's going to be ugly. And it probably will hit if a conservative comes into the White House. Because the printing of the money and the games the government is playing with this market will stop and the market will correct. Heaven help somebody who's in the market when this happens. It may happen as a function of us plain just running out of money. Eventually, this government cannot print any more money. The market just won't tolerate it. Haven't you ever wondered why Main Street is dying out? It's not because of Walmart opening up. It's because the corporate rules and the games this government has set up in the financial markets have made it impossible for anyone to compete against these large companies. Good luck trying to open up a bank these days. Good luck trying to open up a department store or a gas station. Haven't you ever wondered where all the mom and pop businesses went? People say they can't compete because of price. No, they can't compete because of all the rules, regulations, and financial shenanigans this government has placed on the free market. It's just a matter of who's going to survive. That's why all the big boys are buying up all these little startup companies. Haven't you ever thought or asked why couple of college kids come up with a brilliant idea and suddenly get bought out by AT&T for $2.3 billion? You say to yourself, how can this little software program be worth that? Because the big boys have recognized it as a threat to their business and are willing to pay that kind of money just to have that program go away. And they have the capital to do it because these big corporations can borrow money on pennies on the dollar. If money was expensive, then they'd run the risk of competing against these guys. But it's not. Hell, let's borrow $2 billion. It doesn't cost us anything. And we're protecting our $3 trillion business from potentially going bankrupt because of the competition. The little guy, he's glad. $2.something billion to two guys out of college is more than enough money than they'll ever use. We're coming to the end of the show.